Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Erica Minnihan, Managing Director at Dreamit Ventures, and thank you so much for joining us for Athletes and Startups Making It Work. We've got some really amazing athletes and entrepreneurs on the panel today. A lot of really interesting stories about their experiences with translating their professional success in the sports world into professional success in the tech startup world. Professional athletes are increasingly leveraging their social capital to partner with, invest in, and drive growth in tech startups. Their massive online influence and new media savvy, along with an increase in wearable and performance-related technologies, has led to a surge in their interest in getting involved with VC and early-stage technology private equity investments. This panel is going to explore the relationship between the sports and the for both parties. So today I'd like to introduce you to Tiki Barber and Hunter Hillenmeyer, both respected professional athletes and entrepreneurs in their own right. Tiki, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, of course. And I played against Hunter many times in the NFL, so we butted heads because he was on the other side of the ball. But I retired from the NFL 8 seasons ago, and right afterwards I got into media, doing some things at NBC and the Today Show and Football Night in America. But ultimately, I found a fantastic business partner to start a business with that I felt addressed the need that a lot of former athletes come up against, which is finding ways to engage and book different types of events in their communities. And thus Thuzio was founded. And we've grown leaps and bounds over the last 3 years and gone through different iterations, gone through the fundraising process, and tried to figure out how to continually, as I think is a key towards entrepreneurs, reinvent ourselves. And we started as a B2C a business where we were looking at customers who would love to engage with athletes. And very slowly we moved, and now aggressively, towards a B2B market, where we look at a lot of corporate America who want to engage in athletes in different types of events, whether it be a corporate event or a lunch or a dinner or even a flag football game to touch on their passions. And so we're excited where we're going. We're growing, like I said, and creating different types of products that we think corporate and individual America wants to engage with athletes in.
Great, thank you. So Hunter, why don't you tell us a little bit about your professional career as an athlete as well as what you're doing with OverDog?
Sure. So I played 8 years in the NFL, pretty much all with the Bears. I retired in 2010, and the relationship with Tiki runs deep. We actually had the same agent, amongst other things. So in addition to banging heads, we knew each other off the field as well. And I do think it's kind of interesting that we have this panel about athletes investing in startups, but Tiki and I have both been on the other side of that conversation as well, with OverDog and Thuzio having both raised a couple rounds of financing and knowing what it's like to sit on both sides of that table, I think gives a particularly interesting perspective to what we're talking about here today. I went to Kellogg, which is Northwestern's business school, while I was playing, and actually finished in 2010 and then retired from football about 9 months after that. I wasn't a guy who ever thought I would make it that long in the NFL, so I kind of had other plans about where I might end up if I'd never been on an NFL roster, and so despite having taken an 8-year detour to go play some football, I was always kind of a startup guy. Like I thought I might end up in this space somewhere, even back when I was in college and in my early 20s. So I actually went to work for a light bank portfolio company, which is a pretty active venture investor here in Chicago, probably most famous for founding Groupon, as my first job out of football, and spent about a year there, and then had the opportunity to get involved with what would eventually become OverDog. Fast forward, I've now been at OverDog as a co-founder there for almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years in May, and we're actually right on the doorstep of a major product launch. We're launching our app, which to date has existed only as a mobile app, on the Xbox One, which is Microsoft's kind of latest and greatest gaming console. So we're a little bit before that, but we're just a couple of weeks here from going live with that, so it's an exciting time for us at OverDog as well.
That's fantastic. Well, I've had the Good luck and fortune to know both of you, since your companies were pretty young, and to follow the progress. So, I just want to say to both of you, congratulations on penetrating your markets and building your companies with a good amount of success. So it's really exciting to see folks who are actually able to make it work and to build successful brands and to actually gain that market traction that you need to attract VC funding. So speaking of, your involvement with startups, a lot of athletes today are interested in getting involved with startups because, as you mentioned, they're able to not only invest their time, but also their social and personal capital in addition to any financial capital in companies. So what advice would you have for athletes on how they can be smart about deciding which startups to get involved with and how they should work with / invest in startups? Because there are a lot of different ways that they can actually invest. We've got time, we've got their brand, we've got their money. What are some pieces of advice that you might have around how to make smart decisions?
Well, I'll answer first, but I've always believed that do things with other people's money and use great ideas that come to your mind that are relevant to you. I heard this somewhere, and I wish I could attribute it, but I can't remember where I heard it. But it played to me. Find your problem and solve it, and that's what we tried to do at Thuzio. I think the biggest advice that I would give young athletes or really anyone who's looking to found a startup is find great partners and don't have too much pride and ownership, because your vision may be one thing, but how to actually make it fruition and get to execution is something that a lot of athletes don't have expertise doing. We spent so much of our lives going back into high school and college preparing to be athletes and not to be businessmen. So I was fortunate. I found a fantastic partner because of a relationship I had with a kid at the University of Virginia, and Mark Gerson, who had experience doing a company similar to Thuzio, bringing a collection of experts into a field and then finding customers to engage with them. And so I partnered with Mark Gerson, who started a company called GLG. And his passion for that and my passion for athletics, my access to athletes, we started with football players, which was obviously organic, led to us building a database that has now evolved to what Thuzio is. And so I think having the right first step is always important. As Hunter was alluding to, getting out in front of people and raising money is probably the most difficult one because it's always been negotiated for athletes. But also as we find interiorly in sports, the same thing applies outside of sports. It's about relationships. Because of the relationships that Mark, my co-founder, had and the ones that I had, we're able to piece together a lot of funding to get us going. And once we started going, we constantly have to innovate. I think that's the biggest lesson I try to tell people. Always try to innovate, because it's not who innovates first, it's who innovates last who ultimately comes out on top.
Okay, very interesting. Hunter, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think building on what Tiki said, that athletes have a unique opportunity in that, especially those that are leaving the game and trying to kind of figure out their next passion. If you've been smart with your money, you can take some risks as an investor or even as an operator, for that matter, that most people can't. So Tiki and I are both founders of various startups, but if Thuzio went belly up tomorrow, or same for OverDog, we're still going to be able to put food on the table, in the sense that you can take these big risks with your personal time and investment without having the same risk profile of like a 20-something entrepreneur who's literally going to be broke and trying to figure out where they're living if their business doesn't work out. Athletes have some freedom that comes from that to take on big problems and to really jump in and kind of embrace that entrepreneurial mindset without necessarily having to risk everything in the process. And I think that same thing is true on the investing side, in that, you know, Erica, the last time you and I spoke on this topic, I think somebody in the audience asked a question about the 30 for 30 on ESPN about broke. And when you kind of juxtapose what we're talking about here with that there's like a very public track record of athletes who make gobs of money and then blow it. Such a risky investment asset class like startups might not seem like the best idea for athletes And so as much as anything, my advice is to pick your spots. I mean, at the most, an athlete should have maybe 5 or 10% of their portfolio allocated to these risky kind of investments where you can lose every single dollar you put into it. And so that still means that people can make meaningful investments and see fantastic returns, but it's not something where any athlete or any person for that matter, unless they're a professional full-time investor, should be exposing any majority of their liquid net worth to investing in something as risky as a startup.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. And I think that, what really has separated the two of you from, many athletes who are trying to get involved at the same level is that both of you have put a significant amount of time and care into building these companies in addition to whatever, financial investment that you've made. It seems like you're there every day, you're giving it your full attention. This isn't just kind of a side project. It's really something that you've, devoted a good chunk of your lives to, and I think that that's a key part to making it work. So on this topic of athletes getting into the VC world, we all know that Carmelo Anthony recently started Mellow 7 Ventures, and he's backed some pretty well-known brands, including SeatGeek, Lyft, and SMS Audio. How do we think, consumers might be benefiting from athletes getting involved with investing in the tech world, or even startups might benefit from athletes getting involved investing in the tech world?
Well, I think one of the important things to think about from an athlete perspective is the value of your brand. And I kind of was aware of this even when I was in college, that I could differentiate myself by being different than the typical athlete. And I, studied MIS, and I cared about the tech boom in 1997. It was very, very big. We worried about Y2K. Nothing obviously happened, but we were worried about it. And so it was interesting to me, and it felt organic to me. But I think what athletes' biggest strengths are when it comes to being in this space is as a salesperson, as someone who can open eyes to the opportunity or to the product that's being presented by a startup. I think that's what I find my primary role in now with Thuzio. Obviously, at the early stages of it, it's about raising money and figuring out what the products actually are, and doing the the guinea pig work of what do people want to buy over the internet from athletes, and will they actually even buy over the internet from athletes. But once you get a foundation, as I think that Thuzio has, and I know that OverDog is on the verge of getting, it's about selling. It's about making those phone calls and all those people that you've come into contact with over years of playing sports, even going back to college. Some of those kids you graduated with are now CMOs or CEOs of companies, and reaching back out to them and using that relationship as a sales platform to continue to grow your business. And I think that's the biggest asset that I think athletes can bring in mass. Now, individually, if they have a specific expertise, like if they actually know how to code, or if they actually know how to do the things behind the scenes, and that obviously plays in. But the brand, and being able to associate your brand with a product, I think is the biggest asset for athletes right now when you look at how they want to get into this tech VC space.
Yeah, I guess to take it a little more from the investor perspective, at least when an athlete, like especially with a current athlete, they're clearly not in a position where they're going to be able to pore over financial projections and do deep due diligence on an investment opportunity. And so Carmelo is the perfect example. He comes along with, I wrote it down as you said it, Erica, the social and personal capital of having him invest in your business and be on your cap table. There's value in that. But I think for the athletes, as much as anything, there is just sort of this, I think it's really related a lot to what Tiki says about an athlete can get any meeting. There's not a meeting in New York that Tiki can't get. And most people in Chicago that I would want to get FaceTime with, I can do that because of what we used to do. But there's a ton of value in that on both sides of the equation. Like the SeatGeek deal that just made a bunch of headlines a few months ago. I think M7 might have even been involved in that. But I know both the Manning brothers are on the cap table of this investment. but it really makes sense for everybody. Like from the athlete's perspective, they get kind of last in proprietary access to jump in with a deal that's already making tons of money. But that deal wasn't sourced by Eli or Peyton. It was sourced by one of their power broker agents that probably also happens to be best buddies with the CEO of Live Nation or some other like kingmaker in the industry, where just because of who's involved in the investment, the cap table itself is creating tremendous value for that business. And Erica, I know you know how that works, but I do think that those are the opportunities that athletes should be looking for, are the ones where they know they're strategic and they're able to extract incremental value simply because of that, because their name helps get a PR bump around some major product launch, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, Hunter, I think that's, a really great way to put it. Absolutely true. And by the way, everybody, SeatGeek is a Dreamit company, so they're in our portfolio. We were very happy for them, and also just really nice people who've built an amazing platform. So we're happy to see all of these athletes have the opportunity to get involved as investors and not only help the company grow, but take advantage of the wealth that is created by the growth of a really great brand like that. So speaking of, athletes getting involved with tech investment for wealth creation and for, giving them sort of something in the off season to maybe occupy their time and their minds and, their mental energies. How do you think athletes getting involved in tech startups is helping change the culture around the kids and the fans that are now associating their favorite athlete with, making really smart investments around tech? Like, how do you think that this is helping sort of change the culture and the way that we view athletes?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity for athletes to be role models in different ways than we've traditionally been viewed as role models. It was something for a kid to aspire to be. Look at the excellence of XYZ player. You should try to be excellent in that regard. And I've always thought, especially when you get to the inner city, lower income, lower socioeconomic African American community, that the role models weren't right. Like you see all these kids wanting to be basketball players, and I want to grow up and I want to be whoever, Michael Jordan or whoever the African American athlete may be. And the reason they say that is because that's what they see. Right? Those are the people they see on television. Those are the ones that their teachers and their parents hold up as role models, when in fact the percentage is so infinitesimal that they're actually going to make it to that level, that maybe those role models should be the business person in that community who cares and throws money down and reaches out in some ways, but isn't actually on the ground, isn't actually going into provide the tangible, touchable example to these kids. So I think now that athletes, at least some of those who have been successful on the professional levels, are getting into the business world, they're able to serve a dual role, because we, as Hunter will tell you, our organizations, our teams encourage us to get out in the communities. Right? Go to this school, go speak at this hospital, go see these kids, et cetera, et cetera. And when you leave the game, you still have a propensity to want to do that. Right? You still want to go to the schools and give presentations, and you still want to go to the hospitals. And so in a different capacity, if you become successful in your next job, then I think it provides a different type of role model for athletes who have now turned into businessmen, and that gives those kids something else to aspire to as opposed to just being the athlete. I can give you an example. When I was working in television a lot, I went to a school. This kid was too young to have seen me playing football, but she had seen me on Sesame Street. And so she remembered me as knowing Elmo, right? It wasn't, oh, Tiki played for the Giants. It was like, oh, he knows Elmo, like that type of thing. And it just gives you a perspective. You think you're bigger than everything, but actually it's all about context. It's all about perspective. It's when people encounter you and how are you going to be that role model at that specific time, not what you think your role model in.
I don't think I have any street cred for knowing Elmo.
I've met Elmo before, and let me tell you, it was pretty intense and amazing experience. So I feel like
that was athletes are huge. You think they're little. They're actually really big.
It would help me with my 4 and 2-year-old daughters. I don't know where else, but yeah, I totally agree with everything Tiki said. I think that athletes to brand themselves in a different way, just because of where, like, the source that you're getting that from makes it a powerful message. To expand it beyond just athletes, like notable actor entertainers that are investors as well, like a Jared Leto or an Ashton Kutcher. Like, Ashton Kutcher won some sexiest teen choice award thing, and he got up there to accept his award and said, the sexiest thing you can do is be smart. And it went viral because that was such a powerful message to come from somebody like that, to kind of rebrand what I think a lot of kids out there, junior and high school age kids, they don't think being smart is cool. And if athletes can be a help of that rebranding, that, like, not only is it, but it's something that you should aspire to do and something that we aspire to do, I would love to think that athletes can be a part of that conversation.
There was an article today in the Wall Street Journal about the billion-dollar startups, and I'm trying to think of the actress who started a line. I think it's called Honest. I can't remember the.
Jessica Alba.
Yeah, Jessica Alba. Like, no one would suspect that she is an entrepreneur. That she solved problems, she solved it, and this company has gone to great heights. So to Hunter's point, it's not just athletes. It's really anyone in that visible spectrum of celebrity who has great ideas and wants to kind of be an example for how to get it done. I talk all the time on my radio show, Hunter, about being a nerd, right? I embrace my nerddom, and because I think it's cool. I think it's cool to be smart. You just have to tell people that being an athlete is cool as well, just a different kind.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's really interesting that we're transitioning into a world where, rather than just wanting to grow up to play basketball like Michael Jordan, we might have some kids that say, I want Michael Jordan to invest in my tech startup when I grow up. So we love that we're moving in that direction. So speaking of, athletes and, sort of the 5% alternative asset investment guideline and where they're choosing to invest, why do you think that in recent years athletes have been drawn more towards making angel investments and investments particularly in the technology space? Like, why do you think there's been kind of that transition from, what people might see as like real asset investments, real estate, the car dealerships, the restaurants that they used to be in, towards wanting to get involved in the tech world?
Probably pointing to what Tiki just brought up, the fact that everybody's talking about the list of billion-dollar startups. I think that the sort of shared consciousness of how much people think about startups is just off the map these days. And part of that is that all the social networks that are now such a part of our daily conversation are startups, or at least were at one point. Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, like all of these at one point in the last decade were venture-backed startups.
Google Hangout.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's funny because at the same time that I think athletes are moving into the space more, I also think that it's just easier. There's just a spotlight being shined on it more as well. Like I think if you went back 15 or 20 years, it makes me think of like Ronnie Lott and Harris Barton and some of the old 49ers guys. Like, those guys have been in the venture game for decades, but nobody really talked about it then. And I think it's just easier to get wind of the fact that athletes are doing this and realizing that there's additional value to be claimed by owning that you're doing it and by promoting that you are this platform, whether it's for deal flow or just so the next cool thing that's coming down the road, you might get access to it. And I think that's a good thing. It's certainly a good thing for the athletes that are trying to make a living doing it, because venture firms, they talk about maybe the top 20 or so guys. Basically, those 20 firms are collecting like 95% of the profits in the industry. And if the athlete has some proprietary way to get their money in with those smart investors, they should absolutely do that.
Great.
I
And
think also, just to add on what Hunter was saying, I think also, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, who had access to athletes? It was their very close circle, relatives or friends who were, let's start a bar, in our hometown. Now, because of, as Hunter was alluding to, the social networking, phenomenon, anyone can have contact with an athlete and say, hey, and you may ignore it, but you may not. Say, I have this idea I want to pitch to you about YZ, and you get involved in it. Throw in the fact that these tech entrepreneurs, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, they're super. I mean, movies about these guys, and so they become part of that I don't know what to call it exactly, but that cool circle, you know what I mean, that athletes want to hang out with. And so once they get into that circle, they get exposed to all these other different opportunities, and if one fits their fancy, they'll jump at it. And so it's kind of a cycle that used to exclude athletes is now including athletes, and it's only getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
That's really great. So speaking of athletes and your own company, so, with having had a little bit of experience in the athlete space, I'm really interested to learn more about your sort of story with Thuzio. So I'm curious to know, when you started the company, one of your main, sort of must-dos in order to make Thuzio happen was to actually get all of these athletes on board.
Yeah.
So how hard, and I know how hard it is to sell athletes on anything, even if it's selling them on something that's going to make them money. What were the challenges there, and did you feel that they maybe looked at you a little bit differently because you were doing this startup? Like, what are some of the stories from that?
Well, it's a great question, Erica, because when you looked at the space, the market existed, right? To book an athlete to do something has always existed, but there was never transparency. There was never ease in being able to get it done. You had to know an agent, or you had to know the guy directly, and then you had to get to a negotiating process. And so sell what we were trying to sell to our athletes first. We had to build our talent base. We had to build the supply side before we could even think about going out and selling it. Was difficult because they'd never seen it this way. It's like, my agent does that for me. I don't need to be on a platform that presents this on a national stage. My agent does that for me. But what we realized is that the agent, one, only takes inbounds, and two, if the deal doesn't really fit an agent's criteria, then he'll reject it out of hand, even though the talent, given that opportunity to explore that opportunity, may have said yes, especially if it was local, especially if he only had to go 5 blocks away and go have lunch with someone, then he probably would have said yes just for the incremental income. And what we realized is that if you do it enough and you price yourself at the right level, you can make a living doing this, as opposed to just getting that one-off huge, $50,000+ deal. You could do a bunch of $2,500 or $5,000 deals in your free time, because that's what we're actually trading, your free time, and make a sustainable living. And so it just grew that way, and we had to figure out what supply and demand was, how much would someone pay. We had to figure out, how often it was smart to do these for our talent before they felt inundated. We also had to create things. My co-founder always likes to throw this example out there. Before we invented it, you could have Googled flag football with Tiki, Barber, or Hunter Hillenmeyer, and it would have come back with 0 results. But because we started doing it, we created an industry, and those are the innovations that I talk about. We're constantly trying to figure out innovative ways to get our talent, who now have seen us, now that we have over 2,500, 3,000 talent on our platform, and are going to grow much bigger in the very short term, we provide an additional opportunity for them to make income. And there's no tag, right? There's no downside to it, because their agents still work on their behalf. We work on their behalf, and it's allowed us to grow at an enormous rate. It was a lot of work, by the way, Erica, for Mark McDonald and Jared Augustine, who was our head of talent, but now our CEO, just to reach out and call. You got to call, you got to call, you got to call, and explain what we were trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad that you were able to get over the hurdle and get everybody on board, because it's obviously a really great product. So speaking of getting athletes involved, Hunter, with OverDog, can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced and how you may also have been able to use your network within the professional sports community to help the business grow?
Yeah, first it might help just for the people watching to give a little bit of background there. OverDog started off as a business that was very focused on connecting influencers and fans, especially in the world of video games. And our mobile app, in fact, was focused exclusively on pairing influencers, whether that's an athlete or a musician or an entertainer, and a fan of theirs to sit down and go play video games on PlayStation or Xbox. One of the most interesting things that happened was we were figuring out that as we collected all of these data points about people, that they were a Tiki Barber fan and they liked the New York Giants and they also liked the Boston Celtics and the LA Lakers or the Seattle Sounders. Like, we collect these little bits of information about people, and we could actually use that to make really interesting suggestions for who they should be gaming with, even when it wasn't an influencer. And so what we're launching here in a few weeks on the console is actually mostly focused on that part of the transaction, connecting fans with other people that they share common interests with, where, yes, all of the influencers and their contributions to that community will still exist, but OverDog is at its simplest basically an interest-based matchmaking platform now. And so we certainly hope that the interplay between the influencers on our platform, and we've had about 400 or so athletes and various other celebrities use the platform to engage with their fans. We want them in the mix and feel like we have some really powerful tools for them to engage with each other. But what we're doing is mostly now focused on fans engaging with other fans, and that's not just sports fans. That's fans of Game of Thrones or some professional gaming team or a favorite TV show, or even just where they consume their daily news online. And we think all of those are an interesting common ground for gaming, where largely if you're matchmaking with an opponent right now, you're finding someone anonymously. And so the influencers are a super important part of that mixture, but not necessarily like, other than with some promotional stuff, not necessarily like the front and center ingredient to what we're building.
Great. Well, I think that that's really interesting, and everyone tends to go through some sort of a pivot or refocus. So as you went from the influencers and the fans to fan, and Thuzio went from B2C to a little bit more B2B, we can always learn more about what our market wants and how we can better address the market. So I have a question from Grant on Twitter, which is for Tiki. He'd like to know, can Thuzio possibly take on the large sports agencies now by doing a similar type of job in setting rates for deals?
I'm assuming he's referring to the contractual deals, and that's not the space that we play in. We continually try to put on the most interesting business events of a day or of a week or of an evening, and we do that in a lot of different ways, by engaging our corporate clients with opportunities to book talent that accent their clients, but also by doing events like our Thuzio Executive Clubs, where we have one of our very high-end talent. So think Lawrence Taylor or Dan Marino or whoever it may be, giving a presentation to a room of about 50 or 60 people. So it's intimate, it's networking of major business players in whatever market we're in, and a moderated conversation with dinner and drinks. And so it feels like they're getting inside that athlete's mind in an intimate setting, and creates a fantastic way for them to engage in their local community. And so that's how what we currently focus on. When you throw in the agent conversation, we're not a threat to them. We accent what they're trying to do in representing their talent on the marketing side. Those big negotiated contracts that you hear about for their play on the field, that's something that's beyond our expertise at this point.
Okay. Great. So good to know. Grant, there's your answer. So another question for both of you. Obviously you're both very involved with your respective primary startups. Are you involved or invested in any other startups that we may not know about?
I'll go first there. some of them I probably shouldn't talk about directly, but I probably make like 1 or 2 angel investments a year.
Oh, great! Now everyone's gonna know. You're right off the hook.
No, not in that sense, but just like there's a couple that are sort of in stealth mode. But some of those are in the sports space where, somebody that's like, making something that kind of serves the concussion epidemic at the fringe or something like that, where it makes sense because I've kind of lived that space and have a deep understanding of where I think things are going there. And some of them have nothing to do with that. Like I'm invested in a electronic medical records analytics platform. Like I don't have any expertise in that space, but just really believed in what these guys were doing and had the chance to invest alongside a bunch of really smart people who I knew did understand the space. So I'm not the kind of guy that's going to do 15 or 20 investments a year. I think some people get up to that kind of volume, but I really look for the deals where I feel like it's almost been like happenstance or luck that I'm getting access to it in the first place. And when it's usually instances where I feel like I'm kind of the last one getting the chance to invest in something that's going to happen with or without my involvement, that I tend to get the most excited and want to jump in.
I do not have any other investments. Thuzio is my baby. I remember starting this 3.5 years ago at a table at Club Macanudo with Mark Gerson, and just continuing to have this conversation. And as it's grown, it's just made me more and more excited. And so my resources and my time and my energies are completely focused on Thuzio. That's not to say that I haven't been asked to invest in a lot of things, because there is as we talked about earlier in this conference, a value to having an athlete who's been in the startup space already, being a part of things that are going on. But my focus has been on Thuzio, and it will be until I make like $1 billion, and then I can actually start deploying money to other things.
Yeah. Well, I think that having a focused approach is really important, especially when you're so involved with your own company. You don't need any additional distractions. Great. So, I guess since we're just about out of time, if both of you might just have, a very short sort of like 30-second parting word of advice for anyone out there, particularly, maybe athletes, maybe just regular people who are looking to do a startup, given that you've both had several years of experience facing a lot of challenges, learning a lot about launching a business. What would be your one sort of snippet of advice to give to someone who's looking to launch a company?
I'll go first. Don't be afraid to ask people for things. I know one of the hardest things for me is being in New York City. I met so many people from my playing days, and I was walking in this rarefied airs on these boards and meeting all these super successful people. And then when I started my own thing, it became difficult to know how to ask them for things. So don't be afraid to ask for things, because that's how business gets done. When you look at the great successes in New York, I'll give you examples with Steve Ross, who's become a friend and he's one of our investors. He got his business started by asking for help and knowing how to go out and network. And so learning that skill, which interestingly, and Hunter can attest to this, a lot of athletes aren't very good at. They want to get engaged in their phones and they want to be stuck in their own little clique. But being accessible to life and then knowing how to ask them for advice, for help, or even for money is, I think, the biggest key towards creating success in whatever business endeavor you happen to go into.
Great. Hunter?
Yeah, I think that's great advice from Tiki. I guess I'll gear mine towards the audience today is obviously a lot of people that are either involved in the sports industry or interested in the sports industry, maybe some athletes. And so speaking to that audience, I think there's actually a lot of similarities between the sports world and the startup world. I think that the sports, they're both very results oriented. Mm-hmm. And that there's no place to hide in either world. You kind of you have to wake up every day and prove that you're creating value, prove that you're making progress towards accomplishing a goal, or you're not going to be there. In the NFL, Tiki and I both lasted a pretty long time, But every year that roster started with 90 guys, and only 53 of those had a job by the time the first game came around. And that's a pretty intense work environment. And in startups, like the same way, regardless of how good you are today, most startups, when they still hold that vernacular, are always kind of treading the line and like right on the edge of that cliff to like continue proving value and continue validating the metrics that what they're doing is interesting and valuable to people, or they're not going to last. And so I think that there is a lot in common in the sense that like the same things that would draw somebody to the sports world might actually make the world of startups a pretty intriguing career path for people as well. And ultimately, I think that kind of comes down to the fact that the people that are the best in the sports world, the people that end up lasting the longest, they're passionate about what they do. They do it for reasons that go far beyond what their paycheck is telling them to. And I think that you find the same thing with people that build great companies, that a lot of times it has to do with deep belief and conviction that they're solving a problem that's real and interesting and matters to people and makes them excited to get out of bed in the morning. And so I guess I'll take that as, anybody that's listening today that is a big sports guy, that same passion can be found in startups if you're doing the right thing.
Great. And so, both of you have put a lot of time and energy over the last few years. I think both your companies are about 3 or 4 years old, right?
Yep.
So, for the last 3+ years, you've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into both of your respective babies. What do you see as your ideal sort of exit on the horizon? Like, where are you hoping that the company takes you?
We're not even close to thinking about an exit yet because there's still so much to conquer. We started Thuzio with one vertical, and that was football. We quickly moved into baseball, basketball, hockey, all the sports, with the idea that we'd move into really any form of entertainment, any form of celebrity that had fans that wanted to engage with them, which we knew was relevant because of social networks, Twitter and Facebook, etc. People want to engage. And so we still need to get to musicians and hammer that down, and actors and entertainers and chefs. And then that's not even to count the international world where the idea of doing these type of events isn't as polished as it is in the United States. So our exit is out there, but when we look at the total accessible market that we still want to innovate into, it's too big to even think about when we get there yet.
Yeah, so everybody should know that it's a very long road.
Yeah, exactly. The short answer, it's not quick. And if you're looking for that quick exit, you may find it, but you're not going to ultimately get, I think, the fulfillment, the true fulfillment of what your dream could be.
Right. Hunter, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the gaming world is a massive, massive industry, and we are totally just scratching the surface. We're launching on Xbox One, which has 8 or 10 million users worldwide, and will continue to grow. But when you add up all of the PC gamers and mobile and tablet gamers and other platforms like Amazon or PlayStation, there's just gaming is like 3 times the size of the movie industry. It's just massive, massive, massive business, and we really think that what we've started creating in terms of finding a better way for people to connect and match to play video games is something that solves a very real problem for people across all of those platforms. And so we definitely we feel like we're at the start line of something really interesting, and where that leads to in terms of an exit is not on the radar right now. It's not a priority in terms of what we're thinking about as we build our business.
Okay, great. And so both of you guys, are you both venture backed? I mean, I think Tiki is. I don't know if OverDog is as well.
No. We're actually not venture backed. We're angel backed.
Okay.
And when we went to have our Series A about a year and a couple of months ago, all of our initial investors re-up. So we didn't go down that route, at least not yet.
Great. And you too, Hunter, you're all angel backed?
We raised a round this fall that was co-led by Atlas Venture out of Boston and Chicago Ventures here locally. And then we had a handful of strategic investors that went along with them. Like United Talent Agency put some money in. The founder of Zynga, Mark Pincus, is now on our cap table. A couple other people that like in the same way that people get attracted to athletes, like those are people that can open doors for us that we wanted them aligned with OverDog. And so, yeah, we're a combination of venture and angel. But as far as OverDog goes, for us to be in a place now where we've raised a nice round and have a runway that can be measured in years instead of months is pretty nice spot to be in.
Well, so Hunter, what do you think, what were the biggest lessons that you learned going through the capital raising process and putting your cap table together?
You have to be, there's a couple. I think one is that you have to be super patient. I mean, everybody thinks that your idea is good enough that it's going to resonate and you're going to raise money in 2 or 3 weeks. And if you're fortunate enough to have something where you can raise exclusively from your existing investors like Tiki did, that might be a more reasonable timeline, but the average is 6 months. It takes people 6 months to raise money. And it can feel like a huge distraction because when you're out raising money, you're not building your business. And that was one of the biggest frustrations for me, is that I just wanted to hurry up and raise money so we could get back to building this awesome thing. And it takes forever. And so my biggest single piece of advice is just persistence.
Okay, great. And Tiki, what about you? You've got some great investors on your cap table.
Yeah. No, it's for me. It's back to one of the original things I said in this conference. Find a great partner, and I have a great partner in Mark Gershon, who has all of the business relationships and investor relationships, including him being an investor himself. They, I don't want to say made it easier, but it made it much more focused and streamlined with what we were trying to do. We met with a lot of the VC and PE companies here, but to be perfectly honest, we were too small for what they were looking to do. And so it just made more sense for us to stay internal to raise our initial round, our Series A round. We'll have a Series B here in a few months. It's like Hunter, we're looking to grab that runway for the foreseeable future, not have to worry about hitting profitability too soon.
And how do you think, once you brought in outside investors, how did that change the way that you sort of relate to the business, sort of the way that you feel about the growth?
Just like what Hunter was talking about, all of our investors are strategic. And one of the other things that has become important, and I think I mentioned this as well, is selling. We needed investors who not only believed in the product and were willing to put money behind it, but were also willing to open their Rolodexes and give us access to all of their connections as we try to grow this B2B side of our business. Is that, as we mentioned, we were B2C to start, but eventually, really around the Super Bowl in 2014, last year, here in New York City, we realized that it's a B2B world, and if we can permeate that and penetrate it, then this company really, really will grow to enormous size. And so we rely on our investors to help us in that capacity.
Great. Hunter, any thoughts on that? How the world changed once you took those checks?
Yeah, there's definitely our quarterly updates are certainly more formal than they were when it was just 4 or 5 of us. There's some controls that go into having investors that you don't know of a personal nature.
Yeah.
But I think that in some ways, even though that's like some people could perceive that as busy work, it's actually a really valuable exercise to go through to kind of take that reflective breath every so often about your company. Because I think sometimes you're so busy that you can't really take a step back and move, make sure that what you're doing is purposeful and deliberate and planned out as much as it should be. The startups are always running so fast in so many different directions that can be difficult to navigate.
Yeah, definitely. And, I always tell, so at Dreamit, we work with companies that are, hoping to get to the Series A or Series C, hoping to get to where you guys have been able to get. And, it's so important to explain to these startups and the founders that, taking on equity capital, even though everyone wants to brag about how they raised money from this or that top VC, it's a huge responsibility. And, now you've got a board and you've got a lot of expectations on your growth. And, as I say them, unless you can literally spin gold out of straw, you should probably not be taking investor money. So it's amazing to see that both of you have been able to do that, and hopefully you have very happy investors, and we can't wait to see what kind of gold you're able to spin with Thuzio and OverDog. Just want to thank you guys both so much. Any sort of parting words or last comments for the group?
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, simple. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you.
Great.
And thank you, Erica.
Oh, thank you both. It's always fun to get to be on one of these with such interesting and vivacious entrepreneurs. So thank you for making a great experience. And I just want to remind everybody that you can watch the Hangout after it's over at #sportscomp.com. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.